I'm Johnathan Muller, and I hold a tourism portfolio for FINSA. And I'm my profession, I'm a tourist guide, a national tourist guide, and I've been one since 1999.
Johnathan, today's event, how do you find today's event?
Well, today's event for me is very personal. I have been looking for an opportunity like this for the last 2 years. Just not for me to exploit, but just if someone would come along and start something and create a footprint, you know, for indigenous people. And I think that this today is quite a historic moment. There's a lot of you know, especially for tourism, because this is on a tourism route, and because it's on a tourism route, it has great significance, you know, for the indigenous people, because every time we have a bus that comes through here now, you know, there will be a guide probably that will mention that this is where something historic began. The other thing also is that we're looking at having the tourism curriculum rewritten to include indigenous people, especially for the Western Cape. We need to change the rhetoric, and people need to understand and begin to acknowledge who we are. So for me, this was a great moment. I wouldn't have missed this for anything. In fact, I'm a contract worker, and been offered a job for 3 days, and I turned it down just to be here today. That's how important it is.
Thank you. Do you think now, after today, what will the tourism sector hold? Because if we talk about today's historic moment today for all of us, and if we talk about inclusive, so that means that if you see today, it was not about color or people, it was about who we are, and we stand up today as one, as united as one rainbow nation.
Yes. Well, look, that is especially significant because there is no record of Khoisan people driving anybody out. Whether it was the Kobona that came here before the time of Jan van Riebeeck, whether it was the Chinese Admiral Zinn who arrived here in 1421, or whether it was the Phoenicians who came here at 500 AD, and so on and so on. There's no record of them encountering a violent people here. And we've always welcomed everybody. What happened in the time of the Dutch was that you know, there was a misunderstanding. The indigenous people thought that the Dutch were just coming through, like many people came through, you know, get some resources and move on. So they welcomed them. They never understood the concept of ownership as was understood in Europe, and that is where that is where things went horribly wrong. That's where it went wrong. But we want to say that we want to work with people in the future. You know, people talk about you know, where do you come from? You know, it's like asking Table Mountain, where do you come from? When you ask a Khoisan person, we were always here. People talk about Cape Town and South Africa as the place of their birth. Well, this is actually the place of our origin. You know, I worked with Professor Jeremy De Silva, you know, and he's the food specialist. He was on the team that discovered Homo naledi, and he was saying to me that the San people are not linked in any way to any other people group in Africa, not in terms of of the stone tools that was found, not in terms of language, in terms of DNA. They find no connection. So that is quite interesting. And so I think from a tourism point of view and an intellectual point of view, I think there's still a lot more discoveries going to be made, considering that the current South African coastline is only 9,000 years old. And that the coastline extended almost another 100 kilometers into the sea. And if we understand how people developed and how people moved, then we understand that the greatest development in the cranial capacity of humans happened when they moved towards the sea, and they had access to omega-3 and things like that. So there's still a heck of a history, but what is sure is that we are the custodians of South Africa, and we want to welcome people from all over the world. to come and visit South Africa, learn about us, and not just learn about us, but we have something to show the rest of the world, because we have a historical, social, political structure second to none. Indigenous people across the world have this, and we see the failure of democracy. We see the failure of so many systems across the world. We just haven't got a name for our system yet, but we can describe it and we can display it. And that is why, for example, in the Khoisan environment, we don't have kings. There is no such title as a king, because the communities are run by customary councils or by the community itself. It's interesting, that's why men used to get hiding from their wives. Oh man, oh yeah, men used to, and they used to boast about it. And the other thing is, a man could never come inside his house unless a woman said so. A man couldn't even eat until his wife said so. That is why chiefs used to get hidings from communities if they, and you're not a chief, there's no such thing as a bloodline chief. You're a chief for a purpose. You're a leader for a purpose, for a time. This is why, we absolutely, we don't have kings, and we have a social political structure that we can boast about. And that's why we welcome tourists here, and we want to see South African tourism grow from strength to strength. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Johnathan.
I'm going to just ask one question, if I may. Can you
Certainly.
explain the king we've just interviewed in terms of the history of what you've just explained to us now?
Yeah. Okay. So
how does that come about? And
so what has happened? So there are people that call themselves kings now. There are certain structures in South Africa in which there are kings. For example, amongst the Griqua. And we know how the Griqua was constituted. Griqua is today more from what I see, a cultural group, and it's built around the church, and was even given its name by the missionary Mostert, who referred to them as Griekhuis, meaning tall people. So the nation was constituted in the same way that the group Colored is constituted today. It is why. There was a time in our history when Bushman people were killed by Griqua people, because they are constituted differently. Therefore, they have headmen and those, and then they had, I think it was another title, generals or something like that, and then now they have titles of king. It makes sense because it's more along the line of westernized thinking. In terms of the Khoisan, there can never be a king. There was never a king. And so therefore people who try and call themselves kings is perhaps trying to simulate what happened, the titles that westernized countries have. However, and this is the primary importance, a king in the Khoisan, a leader in the Khoisan does not have the same power as the leader of a black tribe. The people who have the power are the customary councils. And it has to remain that way, because that has always been the success of our communities. That has been what has made us different. That's why we've not aspired, or indigenous nations across the world haven't grown to become, these huge, big countries with states and all kind of departments. We haven't, because we don't aspire to that. Because we find life, we find the simplicity of life to be the most desirable for us. And so I always say to people, the answer to the question of how to live a simple life is a very complicated one. It has become.
And how does the Ishikwa fit in here? What title or
Hesekwa? Yeah, certainly. Okay, so my grandfather was a politician, and the Hesekwa, he fought for the return of the ground of the Hesekwa at Slangerrivier many years ago. I was 12 now, I'm now 56, and I remember going around with him. So the Hesekwa is simply one of the tribes along our southern coast. So if you started in Hout Bay, you get the Goreng High Kwenas. On top of the mountain, the Goreng High Kwas. Then you came here on the Cape Flats from Liesbeek River all the way across to Tygerberg Hill. Just on the other side of Tygerberg Hill was the Goreng Kwas. Kochokwas to the north, they were the biggest tribe. They had over 29,000 heads of cattle. So you can imagine, just think about it. If you had so many cattle, how vastly you must have been distributed across the land. Then you went up to the right hand side, you had, I forget now, on top of the mountain, you had another tribe. And then if you went beyond that to the Swellendam area, then you got the Hessequas. When you went beyond the Hessequas, you got the Kochokwas. And when you got there, the Khoi became a little bit taller. In fact, when Bartholomew Dyers sailed around the Cape, I think it was Dyers, when he sailed around the Cape, and they met the Khoi there, they actually described them as black people. But when you look further, you know, they found them playing musical instruments. Each one had a long, like a long pipe. And this pipe was without holes, so each one played a different note depending on the length. And they were playing music there, and the scribe was rebuked for not saying more about the music. And he remarked, well, I did it because I didn't think much of it, because it was like anything you would have heard in Europe at the time. 1400s.
Yeah.
This is a historical fact. So, so that is where so coming back to the story, this is where the Hessequa fit in. They're absolutely one of the tribes along the south coast, and they actually extend also a little bit further into to Zierbrak, okay, which is Tyru. And Tyru, Zierbrak, you know, became a cattle station of the Dutch later on, and that is where one of only two places in the world where you found the Ridgeback dog. The Ridgeback dog. One of only two places during that time. Yeah, yeah, according to ship's logs. Very interesting place that, yeah. All right.
So,
I just lost the question.
Ridgeback.
Oh, strandlopers.
Right.
We can find very little information.
History,
on
yeah, actual
strandlopers. They
knowledge.
broke away from
Yes.
the tribe, from the sand somewhere and
Yes.
ended up on the beaches.
Right.
That's sort of all we can find.
Okay, so from what I've read, and look, I do a lot of research in this, and so in doing research, you know, a lot of documents were written by travelers. Some of them were written by philanthropists and other educated people, and then just, you know, adventurers and so on. And you get bits and pieces of information that comes in. And when you put all the bits and pieces of information together, you look at things in the realm of possibility and probabilities. And when you look at it like that, we begin to find that the San Bushmen were actually the first peoples. And we find that the Khoi seem to have migrated into this area very, very early in time. And I believe it's about 80,000 years ago, 80 to 100,000 years ago. And where that connection was made. And it was actually, so there are two different lifestyles. So it seems that it was actually the Khoi that gave the name San or San to the Bushmen, meaning those who are without.
Oh.
Okay, so then it means that today you could be Khoi and tomorrow you could be San, depending on whether you had cattle or not. And the tribe, the Strandlopers, apparently, which Jan van Riebeeck found here at the Cape, was only 18 people strong. So, when he found them here, he found them in the winter time, which was probably a very lean time for them, or difficult time for them. They were probably out of cattle, etc. That's why they came. Well, look, they described as beggars, but I think, you know, the way tribes worked, you know, it was a privilege to give to another tribe, but they were, of course, they were seen as beggars coming to beg at the castle. And I think it's maybe for that reason, you know, that they had this intermittent, you know, interchangeable, you know, lifestyle. That sometimes they were San, they became hunters and gatherers, and other times, you know, they acquired cattle because they had the skills to do and the knowledge to do so, and actually chose that lifestyle. Case in point is what happens in the Clan William area, where you had tribes that actually trekked seasonally. From inland, they trekked out to the sea. That's why when you're going to the Clan William area, you're finding seashells there. Come on, how far from the sea is that? So, you know, there was this up and down movement. So sometimes we can make the error of, for the sake of our own, I want to say, understanding, or sometimes sanity. You know, we try to classify things and put things in the box and so on. But that Khoi San, you know, lifestyle was very interchangeable. and so on. And so, this is what this is probably why, you know, some of our people think that they're kings and all sorts of royalties. They don't understand. They're trying to fit in with the westernized lifestyle for the sake of some sort of recognition or remuneration or something. But the truth about indigenous people are absolute humility and simplicity of life and respect for everybody and everything around them.